much for being here with us. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Good, thanks. Nice to see you.
Where are you right now?
I'm actually in Baltimore, in Maryland, States.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm currently based out this side.
Okay, cool. Did you leave? Were you in South Africa for a while before you?
Yeah, I'm actually doing a fellowship at Johns Hopkins University.
Oh, amazing.
So I came out for the fellowship and kind of doing some projects out here, busy researching some stuff, but also still working on a number of projects back home in South Africa. I just got back a month ago. I was there for 2 months.
Right.
December, January, Feb. Yeah, so obviously now with COVID, I was locked and I was here for like over a year and a half, not able to travel. So
Yeah.
I managed to kind of, it was a window open, so I went.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And now you're back. What's the fellowship pertaining?
Yeah, I mean, in the sociology department. And so looking at, currently I'm doing some work around developing a film on the history of Black bookstores and the impact of Black bookstores as an institution.
Amazing.
One is obviously a space for knowledge production, but also a space for like a restoration of memory and archive, but also how these spaces became physical spaces for mobilization and organizing. So you have all these obviously revolutionary movements that kind of came out of these spaces, right? And it kind of reimagined liberation, right?
Of course,
yeah. So anyway, so I'm busy making a new film on that history.
Amazing. Okay, well, first, because I'd love to hear all about the new film that you're working on as well, and sort of the evolution of your work. And this film, was this your first one, The Prodigal Son?
Yeah, this was actually my first feature-length documentary film. Yeah. I was about 22, 21 when I started working on it.
Yeah.
And it took me 5 years. Well, 7 years actually. 7.
Well,
yeah,
it's got that feeling like you can tell that it's it's a labor of love, and you travel to these different places, and that must have taken time.
Oh yeah. It was research, I think, for like 3 years, figuring out the story I want to tell. And the story obviously happened, as I was making the film, right? Kind of developing the arc and all of that. But yeah, it was interesting, an amazing journey, and I'm very grateful.
Yeah, and I mean,
able to make the film.
Yeah, I think it's a great contribution, and I'm so happy that we were able to share it. Because one thing that we do try to do is to curate a diversity of different types of films, and I think this one is just such a great film in terms of what it offers, which is this like incredible insight into this really complex history, right? But also it's sort of creating this bond, because it's your personal story, so it's almost like how the sort of larger social issues, the social migration is sort of departing from this personal, so it's like the personal and the socio-political kind of wrapped in one. And the journey of like doing this sort of almost sort of like pilgrimage in some ways to this homeland, like discovering your identity through that. I think it was really amazing. And I guess I wanted to ask you, like 7 years, that's a long time to be working on something. So I guess like, what was it, why did you feel it was necessary for you to make this film, for you to connect with this ancestry?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. The journey really started I think around the age of 17, final year of high school. And there was a project, an assignment that we had to do. This is, in Cape Town, South Africa. And the assignment was looking at, what your ancestral, like your lineage, right? Your ancestral lineage, and kind of mapping out. That was the assignment. The assignment, that ironically, that assignment triggered. It opened up a portal, right? About this question of who are you, and what's your ancestral lineage, and then obviously with South Africa, obviously a space for migration. Cape Town specifically, a port city, a city of global commerce. It's always been a global city, right? And so this idea, I mean, there was a mythology as well in the family, right, about this man who came over the ocean. I think my sister articulates
I
really
had
well.
that written down here actually to talk about mythology and identity, you know.
Yeah. So it was at age of 18, right, when I started researching and the introduction to Marcus Garvey, right, and the UNIA and this idea of Back to Africa movement. At first, you know, when I started reading it, read like a mythology, but then, you know, as you go into the archive, you start excavating the research material, and you realize that this was an actual idea that came into reality. People moved, right, and these young men and women traveled, you know, left the Caribbean and traveled across the world, and ironically ended up in a place like Cape Town, right? I mean, during the height of, like, before the conception of apartheid, you know, of 1950, right. 1948 came about. They arrived in like late 18th century, beginning of 19th century. So it's a really interesting, you know, it was a really interesting journey, right, to excavate that kind of archive and that memory, and that opened up a whole new chapter in South Africa's history, because then, you know, because we think about this idea of migration in a very, you know, kind of one-dimensional way, like people moved from the north and they settled in one space and then kind of made, you know, memory, create culture, create indigenous knowledge systems, etc. But this chapter specifically about the Afro-Caribbean community and Afro-American as well, ironically, all settled in Cape Town. It also speaks to the broader discourse around British imperialism, because at that point, obviously, it was a British colony. South Africa was a British colony at the time. And so after emancipation, you know, the British needed, you know, workers to basically work on these steam ships, and ironically ended up in Cape Town, South Africa. So it was an amazing journey. And again, it opened up so much, you know, new knowledge production, a new sense of, you know, reclaiming identity, a broader Pan-African identity for a lot of people who watch the film, who start engaging in their own ancestral journey. So and yeah, so that's, you know, I think that's what the value, you know, of this journey to have made this film kind of really conceptualize this idea of a restoration of memory and reclaiming an ancestral, you know, journey of self, you know, and of my family's history.
Why do you think that's important to reclaim that sort of ancestral, like, what is it, you know, as opposed to just, you know, going about your life and, like,
yeah,
you know, doing what you're doing, you know, like, why do we need to know about our history and our ancestors?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I mean, it was this curiosity, right, and growing up with this mythology about this man who came over the sea, over the ocean, and you know, obviously with the complexity of identity politics in South Africa, right? You know, the intersection between, like, class politics, race, identity. It's, you know, it's a narrative that's still coming of age in a place like South Africa. We're still trying to articulate what does a South African identity mean, right? And breaking away from this kind of rainbow nation concept, right, which was famously coined by Desmond Tutu, pre-1994. And so obviously growing up, you know, in a place like Cape Town and growing up in a very specific area like the Cape Flats, you know, growing up in a township, you know, in a working class community, but also, you know, according to apartheid classification, being classed as like a colored person, a so-called colored person, right? And I disown that, you know, that identity classification, that box, right? And so I think it was obviously, you know, the introduction to a kind of broader Pan-African identity through Rastafari for me was a pinnacle, you know, kind of zeitgeist moment, you know, and kind of introducing me that to almost reimagine my, you know, your own idea of your own identity, right? And not and kind of decolonizing the construct of this box that was given to you, right? It was kind of identification kind of box. So what happened, what for me was critical, is that not just for my family to articulate this idea that we are part of a broader Pan-African identity, but was also, I felt it was also my duty for my community as well, right? Because for the last, over the last, 300, 400 years, right? Through genocide, through mass genocide of the Khoi and the San. And a lot of so-called colored people are descendants, right, of the first nation of South Africa. But because of apartheid, because of colonization, that was, that indigenous knowledge and indigenous identity, was completely annihilated and removed from people's shaping their own kind of political identity as well, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it also speaks about the idea around, if you remove people, from an ancestral identity, you also then can, colonize, the existence and the physicality, the physical land mass. And here, I'm speaking about specifically around, what happened during colonization in a place like Cape Town, where, plantocracy was a very real thing. When we think about plantocracy, we think about like the Caribbean or the Americas, but that also happened in a place like South Africa or Cape Town more specifically, because obviously it was one of the big, it is still one of the biggest wine exporters, right? So slave labor, slave market and labor exploitation was very rampant, with very real reality. And that's also part of my family's ancestry. My mom's, her family, were dispossessed from the land, in the Greater Western Cape, and came from a rural town and moved and migrated to the city because of land grabs, and evictions. So all of these kind of microcosms, of a political consciousness, understanding that, colonization happened was a real thing. It had a real impact, on people's lives. And so how do we restore that, that the memory to reclaim identity, reclaim your Africanness?
Exactly.
And for me, Prodigal Son was the articulation and also my contribution, like, the idea of a redemption song, right?
Yeah.
An offering to the world, an offering to my people, an offering to Black people across the world, right? That we are scattered, around the world. And this is one chapter, right, of many chapters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, it's made me think about, like, well, one of the reasons why we wanted to do this festival, and I say this all the time, is that, it's part of this, my fascination with stories and the power of storytelling in this process of reclaiming identity, particularly in a Caribbean context, when story, the colonizing forces, they were smart and shrewd, and they knew the power of story, and they knew that it was integral to identity, and they knew that that strength of identity was integral to having any kind of revolutionary spirit or being able to fight back. They knew that. And one of the people that you interview in the film, he talks about Willie Lynch, and how the psychology of colonization was very, it was a very sophisticated plan in a lot of ways. It was,
exactly.
And the, so for me personally, like, learning about all of those things, like, part of this festival is about reclaiming that space, reclaiming that identity, because also it's something I was thinking about Malcolm X's autobiography, when he learns about the history. Like, now these narratives are around, but when he's in jail and he learns about what's actually happened to Black people, and like, that none of them knew anything about it. They didn't know that there was something that needed reclaiming, because they didn't know it had been taken away. And so he starts having these conversations with other people, and you know what I mean? And like, that kind of, I think that kind of awareness is so crucial in terms of trying to orient yourself and waking up to the fact that, oh wait, there was a robbery, there was an injustice. Like, I don't have to live a half life. You know what I mean? So I think that your film is so perfect for what we're trying to do here, and in terms of what that's offering and what that's bringing, and your personal story within that is just so beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I really want to ask you, actually, what are star sweets? Because he was like,
that's a great question. Yeah. Good question. So in fact, it's interesting. I guess you probably in St. Vincent or elsewhere in the Caribbean, so it's different brand names for sweets, right? I mean, it's a sweet, we had the Star Sweets, and there was the Wilson blocks, which my uncle so beautifully articulates so poetically.
He's such a character as well.
All of them, like the whole fam's characters galore, right?
Yeah.
So you can imagine like just the archive I'm sitting with, like of them, you know, and actually as I was listening to you, I was actually thinking about the importance of archiving, right? What you're doing, for example, with a festival of this nature, as you also, you know, as it's not for me, it's like, you know, there's that idea of the end product, right? The film gets premiered, etc. But this amazing element that we tend to forget is that we also archiving our own stories, our own memories. This has never really happened. I mean, if you think about who was archiving our stories, we are scientific projects, right?
Yeah.
Ethnographers, anthropologists were researching us, right?
Yeah.
For so many layers, you know, on like whether it's scientific or for medical research. And we were merely just subjects, right? In the frame. And so, you know, if we're thinking about decolonizing the gaze and decolonizing the lens, that's exactly what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
You know, archiving space, opening up space as well for people to archive their own memories, their own histories. And I think that's the powerful, I'm excited about that, like just seeing like with your festival and all these other festivals I've been participating in, you know, there's a beauty and there's a real power to it, you know, and so I just wanted to, you know, also just pick up on what
I absolutely appreciate that. And I think that work is so important, and what's coming out of the, you know, of course, like people have been pushing back and reclaiming narrative through literature and through music within the Caribbean for, you know, many decades. But you know, I think obviously like I like love the medium of film, and I think it offers, particularly in terms of how it is so connected to our contemporary moment, our technology, our communication, and it is so impactful, and it's, you know, easier to consume in some ways than reading a book about something, and and it you know has the ability to kind of like charm you, and you know, and all of these incredible like magical things about the medium. So you know, that's kind of like why we're here.
But to come back to answer your question about
the Star Week. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Uncle Joe. But yeah, so Uncle Joe is telling a story about, you know, obviously during the height of apartheid, right? They're living in District 6, right? And so obviously you learn about the story of the Forced Removal Act of 1960. So all of a sudden, you know, there's these racial classifications. All of a sudden, people are, you know, designated to these like racial boxes, right? So all of a sudden, my uncle, you know, is told to sit at the bottom, right, of the cinema, and his friend, who's like lighter of complexion, who then passes for white. So there was this whole interesting backstory as well, what that's happening in the conversation with my family, right?
Yeah.
About my father telling a story about his friend. Because literally, you know, there was the brown paper test, right?
Right.
Or the pencil test in South Africa, in a similar, you know, process where they
just explain what that is, just in case people...
Yeah. So the brown paper test in the context of South Africa, right? Basically, you know, in this racial classification of so-called colored, right? And again, to just contextualize that as well, to frame that, right, in the kind of, you know, context to racial identity politics. And so in South Africa, right, you basically had, you know, to create a buffer, right, a kind of proxy, you know, against the decolonial project, right, that Black people were starting to imagine and start articulating, right, through the rise of the ANC, obviously, PAC, Pan-African Congress, etc. So the so-called colored identity, right, is created by the apartheid system, right, to create a buffer zone, right? And it's placed similar to the Willie Lynch theory, right, that people, you know, talk about in the West, right? So my uncle is telling a story about how his best friend, all of a sudden, you know, they can, so the brown paper test, so in the context to, if you were, you know, depending on your shade, right? If you pass the brown paper test, basically, if you were lighter of, you know, to a certain complexion, you can then basically potentially qualify to play white, right? And then they also had the pencil test, right? So if a pencil basically kind of, you know, goes through and it falls out, you can also qualify to pass as white,
I
some
mean, what is
crazy
this? What
mad
is
thing.
this space where they're just putting pencils in people's hair? It's just like,
Oh, so I mean, there's also, I mean, there's this physical space. There's schools. They go to schools, for example, right? And they, do these experiments on kids. They have like, certain area, like, public hospitals, right? Where they actually, where families are like, okay, maybe we can qualify for white, right? So people go in, they do the test, and they like come out, and they're like, okay, cool. They now classified as white, which meant obviously all the benefits that comes with, a white privilege, right?
so that, yeah, yeah. I mean, this is, I don't mean to cut you off, but it's just
Yeah, no
making me
worries.
think about how, like, thinking about race and how it is socially constructed, because
Yes.
here you have a clear mechanism that's being put in place on a large scale to create this idea of race. One of the films that we just showed in the short segment is called Lifted, and it's from Trinidad, and it deals with the migration, a lot of people migrating from Venezuela, refugee status into Trinidad, fleeing certain situations and stigmas and stuff that they deal with. And there's also a conversation going on between this group of young artists, and they have this conversation that one of them's Chinese, one of them's Indian, one of them's Black, and they talk about the first time they realized that they were their race. The first time I realized I was Chinese, he said. She said, the first time I realized I was Black, I was 17. The first time I realized I was Indian was when I was called this, and you're like, wow, because you like I was said in that Q&A, you're not just born with these ideas. This is something that's constructed. So on one level, it's like not real, right? In a way.
Yeah.
And on a deeper level, but on another level, it's so real because it informs your life experience, it informs how you're treated, it informs, and that's kind of like, and I think also with a lot of these movements, like I think it's so positive, these conversations are happening. And in the UK there is a film called Pressure that was made in 1972 by Horace Ove, who is a Trinidadian filmmaker, and it's like the first Black British film that was ever made. And in interviews he's like, look, yes, I'm proud that I have this title, but at the same time I don't want us to be trapped in these titles. And he's kind of calling us to reach towards a humanity that is deeper than that, so it's just interesting. Like, these are just these kind of things, like they're negotiating, because I think it's all of these truths that are kind of coexisting.
Yeah exactly.
Yeah. Did we talk about the Star Suites yet?
Yeah, so basically, long story, I think I kind of just went off
No, it's fine.
But
good.
I think to basically just break it down, right? Star Suites, right? Because I was actually kind of bringing the kind of broader discourse of that sequence, right? Of that scene, of kind of what I was trying to articulate visually and all creatively.
And then I jumped in. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, no, it's all part of the cipher, right?
Yeah.
And so Star Suites was really a famous brand, right? Of sweets, high in sugar, kind of had probably a major impact on rotten teeth, in South Africa, amongst young kids. But yeah, so the Star Suites was this sweets that basically was cheap, right? And kids were consuming it, left, right, and center. So there was Star Suites and the Wilson blocks that my uncle also talks about, Yeah, I've had it, I grew up with it as well. It was, hella good, as a 60-year-old kid, Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. What's the brand like? What would be equivalent, for example, in like St. Vincent or in London, for example? What would be that equivalent?
I mean, in St. Vincent, there's like Chubby.
Yeah.
Chubby, the little chubbies. We were always drinking those, and then where I'm staying now in Finsbury Park, it's got a lot of African and Caribbean people that live there, and they sell, in some of the little shops where you can get plantains and eddos and all these things. They have Chubby, and I was like. It's just this, and it's all these like fluorescent colors, and it's like,
yeah, exactly, right. I think it's that's what they trick us with, right? The psychology of like brightness and like, oh, wow, buy that, right?
We had a lot of snow cones as well, so it was just like,
oh yeah, popular, same in South Africa, snow cones, big heat,
snow
big
cones was the thing, and you never really questioned it. You're like, I'm just eating crushed up ice with
I know, right? Yeah, I know. So many things that we consume as kids,
So back to your film, like, you ended up going to St. Vincent.
yeah, how mystic is that, right?
How did that come about?
Yeah, great question. I love telling it, it's such an amazing story. So I'm in Barbados, right? In the middle of production, I'm shooting, and then so I meet a journalist, right? Andrea King. And Andrea King, wonderful friend and, amazing thinker, from the Caribbean. And so Andrea King she was a writer at that time for The Nation, right? And The Nation, I mean, obviously it's distributed across the Eastern Caribbean, if I stand correct, right? I'm not sure, maybe it's probably, obviously,
much a
broader.
St. Vincent, I'm not sure.
Yeah, but the newspaper ends up in St. Vincent, right?
Wow.
So Andrea writes, she basically offers me a whole like spread, right, of my journey.
Wow,
in Barbados, right, about the film and what am I doing here, and I'm also reaching out to if any, if there's family members with the last name Orderson, right? They should please contact. So see, there's a profile piece, and then someone, Andre Liverpool, right? I would love to see. I'm actually giving him a shout out here because I'm actually trying to get hold of him as well. So, I've actually asked a friend of mine in St. Vincent to actually go look for Andre Liverpool. But anyway, at that point, he was part of the Pan-African International Congress, right?
Okay.
And so they had a chapter in St. Vincent, right? Mystic. So he calls me out of the blue because my number was actually in this article. Calls me out of the blue. Listen, I'm calling from St. Vincent. I would like you to come over.
Yeah.
So I was like, listen, I am in the middle of a shoot. I'll, if you give me like a week to prep myself, because I have all these interviews lined up, right? Yeah. So then in a week, he books the ticket. 2 minutes later, I'm on a plane, I land in Kingstown. And then, I was so overwhelmed by one is just the topography and the scenery and, the nature and the waterfalls, right? And just like, in fact, it just like, it immediately obviously took me to Cape Town as well, right?
Yeah.
And so there I was, right? So then he asked me, actually, can you come out and do a workshop with young filmmakers, like in exchange of being here and sharing your work? So, I arrived next morning, boom, I'm in this like workshop hall, I think it was a church or something, in the middle of Kingstown. And at that point, he had a 7-day window to organize, publish a flyer, put it out. And we had like, about 25 participants who came out, filmmakers. And I would love to, one day meet these film participants who were in the room, Such an amazing and beautiful experience, I mean, it articulated, what, also just like what, as my collective, as Anya Rising back home, what we want to do, right? For me, that was the foundation. I mean, we're talking about like 16 years, like 15 years ago. And so there I am, 25 participants. We watching films, and I'm teaching about like my methodology, my pedagogy of how I think about cinema. And I was I showcased some of my work, and they showed some of their work. And I just met these amazing people, including your mom, who was a participant in the workshop. And it was just like, wow, what a beautiful moment. And I cherish these moments, for the rest of my life, because it's just like, it was really the foundation of who I am, what I represent now, in terms of how I perceive the positionality of my work, my responsibility to my people, and also kind of like transcending outside of, also thinking broader, out of the confinement of the continent of Africa, right? And also kind of creating a broader Pan-Africanite consciousness. For me, St. Vincent, the Caribbean, working in the Caribbean really defined that for me. And I, I'm very grateful for the experience. And also just like, was very, and I mean, not to be esoteric or anything, but it was very ancestral. It was very deep, I was, I actually, ironically, I have a good friend, a family friend, who's a Sangoma, right? A traditional healer.
Yeah.
And so she hit me up, on the phone. She said, listen, your great grandfather is talking to me. You guys, In fact, check this out, right?
Wow.
Before I was still deep in research, 2 years of research, right? Because I was at that point I was still working in the industry. I was working for the SABC, right? South African Broadcasting Corporation. And so this friend, family friend, Sangoma, he's like, listen, the ancestors is speaking, your great grandfather is talking to me. And I do actually, then she hits up my sister. It's like, listen, this is what's happening. My sister calls me, like, listen, Zena is revealing. And then Crystal, then my sister tells her, listen, Kurt is actually making a film about our great grandfather. And it was just like my thing, you know, like really beyond, you know, this realm. Yeah. Right. And I just must think another good friend of mine recently, you know, also, you know, a healer from back home. She's like, you know, she's like, your great grandfather is talking to us, talking to me again. This is another portal, another individual, family friend. And then I'm telling her, this is mystic, because the film just got picked up at the film festival in the Caribbean. And I said, boom, there we go. So anyway, it's very, very deep, very mystical. Actually, you guys actually showing the film 14 years later, right? It's like, I mean, it's like 14 years later, the film somehow gets picked up again, you know? So yeah, it's very ancestral. It's, you know, probably very esoteric, you know, but the ancestors around us, we're not, you know, it's not like surprising, right? At the same time, we're very conscious people who, you know, who open themselves up, right? To acknowledge that, you know, we have people who came before us and they're around us and they guide us, right? So we give thanks, you know, for that ancient knowledge and that, you know, ancestral spirit that still guides us, you know.
We give thanks, absolutely. And I think on a lot of levels, and this is something that was in your film as well, is also like this sort of general sense or theme about kind of awakening, you know, awakening to these levels, awakening to this knowledge, like awakening to that presence, and then what that awakening does in terms of the type of reality you can live, you know, the depth of perception you can have, you know, the way that you can engage with people, I think, and like how the world opens up for you with that, you know.
It's mystic, you know. I had our DP in Barbados, right? Shout out to Melanie Springer, amazing producer, production manager, and she was actually one of the DPs in Prodigal Son. And I remember just the day before I left, I basically flew back to the US, right? Because I was actually in Baltimore. So I find myself again 15 years later back in Baltimore, right? Mystic again. And she was telling me, sitting in the car, you know, it's like, it was the final shoot, right? You know, so I've been to shooting in Barbados, went to St. Vincent, you know, took my camera, and your mom became a character in the film, and she articulated this amazing story. It just like blew my mind. Right?
I mean, when I saw her, I was like, what?
Yeah, your mom, mystic, you know, just a mystic, you know, it's a lovable being, you know, and a comrade, you know, of mine that I am very grateful for, you know, and an elder, you know, in our community. You know, I've been trying to, you know, keep up with a good friend of mine, actually, who's based in St. Vincent, and he's, you know, I said, yeah, you know, Sister Fonnie. Yeah, like, you know, she was my art teacher, and like, I was like, wow. And oh yes, I was telling you about Melanie, right? So then she sits, you know, sitting in the car, the final day, we're saying goodbye, right? And she's like, you know, a lot of people have come through here, right? From foreign, you know, they pass through, they, you know, produce a project, you know, but apparently the story is that patients are very like kind of keeping it this like, okay, who are sussing you out, right? Figuring out, and not too hospitable, right? And, you know, from face value, you know, based on face value. And she's like, you know, just moving with you, like people are just like very hospitable and like come through, you know, like, you know, yeah, you must meet so and so, you know. And that's basically how the Prodigal Son were made. With just people who were like, actually, you know, you should speak to so and so, you know, and like, actually meet my cousin, meet my uncle. And she was just like, you know, we see, you know, through the facade, you know, we see who you are, you know. And you are one of us. You know, we're acknowledging you, you know, as our distant cousin,
Beautiful.
And that was just like very heartical,
Yeah, beautiful.
just thinking about now, it's just like, it's just beautiful, give thanks,
Well, my mom is actually here on the live, and
No
she
way.
says, she says she has brother Andre Liverpool's contact.
No way. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So we can get that to you.
Give thanks. Yeah.
We have a couple questions too. She says it's great to see you.
Oh wow, beautiful. Thank you. We need to catch up, please. Yeah.
I think you guys would have a lot to catch up on. She started this amazing project in the prisons.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, really incredible. We have a couple questions. So Javed D'Souza asks, what were your challenges getting the project completed, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, great, important question. So I mean, initially, it was a labor of love, when the project, from its inception, right? It was like, I need to tell the story, right? About my family, about, this ancestral journey, and more importantly, it was also just archiving my family story, really. I mean, I had, back of my mind, I was like, this is potentially a film, but I'm also just documenting my family story, right? And then the producer actually approached me, right? To say, actually, we should think about making a film about this story, right? And so that's kind of how the journey started. This is like, just in terms of a chronological timeline. I mean, this journey started back in like 2002, 3, right? We started, filming, and so the producer came and we started, we wrote a proposal, right? The film, basically got picked up at, a few of these pitching forums, right? And so I remember one pitching forum, it's like all these like international broadcasters, and there was like an interesting excitement about the film, outside of like just my little, like the little camera and like writing, scribbling notes down, like, oh, so this is actually a film here,
Yeah.
And just after seeing the interest from like the BBC and it was Canadian TV was there, and like all these other broadcasters, I was like, hold up, actually here's a film, right? I mean, again, I'm like 22. I don't really have a lot of life experience. I don't really know what the world of cinema and film is really about, the business aspect. And so, I just went with the gut of like, listen, then there was like money offered, but then there was all these conditions, and I was just like, what? I was being a rebel at, well, kind of, I think I still am, but I refused the money because all these conditions on, on receiving the money. And I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna go on. I had a camera at that time. I was working as well, in the broadcasting
field. What were some of those
field.
conditions, if you don't mind me asking?
They wanted to basically dictate the story. They had their own idea of what the film should look like and feel like,
right.
And what should be the arc of the story. And I was like, no, I had my own ideas. Yeah, literally, I actually went. I remember going to we got the letter. You were green light. The project was green light lit, and then so I go meet up with they flew. They came to Cape Town because they're based in Johannesburg, right? Came to Cape Town, met with myself and the producer. In fact, no, it was actually just me and the representative from the foundation. And he was like, the script, there's some gaps in the script and this, that, and the third. The regular rhetoric, right? From the industry.
Coca-Cola right here.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a sign there. The contract, the sign, dotted line, And it was a nice lump sum of money, right? But I don't know, at that point, I was also like, highly like inspired by just like, revolutionary figures and revolutionary thinkers, and I was just like, I don't have to buy in, to this establishment here. I can tell my own story in my own terms and conditions, and that's basically what happened. That's how. So I moved on, and then I just basically used my salary, right? Producing all these television shows. Use my salary to fly up because at that point I was living in Johannesburg, right? And so I would fly up to Cape Town to film, whenever I can, and hire a DP, right? And I have a bit of money to pay a sound person, a DP, and we go out for like a few days. And I fly back to Johannesburg, and that's kind of the first like a year or so of shooting was that.
Mm-hmm.
And then And then I resigned from the SABC, right? So what happened was, actually, let me just rewind. So I'm working with the broadcast. I tell the executive producer, listen, I need to actually take a sabbatical. I need to go make my film here. So she, deep down, she knew like I'm a filmmaker as well, right? Also want to make my own stories. And she's like, okay, cool. You can take a, sabbatical. How long do you need to be out? I said, listen, I need like about like 9 months, 8 months. She's like, okay, cool. A week later, she had this letter. Said, okay, cool. You can go do your thing, right? And so, yeah, next moment, I buy myself a ticket to fly to the US. I got a gig out there, right? I was working in like teaching visual arts to young people in New Jersey and Baltimore. And it was the first time in the US as well. And like, also like this, to a large extent, like living my best life, right? Like kind of first time traveler and like moving around. And so I then used that money that I made, couple of dollars I made here in the US, and my savings to basically fund Barbados, the leg of Barbados. And then obviously, brother Andre Liverpool, he flies me to St. Vincent, right? So that leg is funded, right? Technically. And I fly back to Barbados and I carry on. And this also, another mystic story is like how if like accommodation, I end up not paying for living in Barbados. I met someone in the streets, Ras Simba, who's in the film. I met him in the street, like real talk. I remember rocking up in Barbados, and then I was staying with this aunt actually. This auntie I found on like, in fact, I found her on this booklet right at the airport. I was looking for accommodation. So there I am. Oh, actually, hold up. Let me just quickly track back. So I get to immigration. So I'm in Barbados, in Bridgetown, right? So immigration. So like, like in order for you to leave, and for us to allow you in the country, you need to have accommodation. Like, where are you staying and what's your mission here? So you know what? I'm actually just here, kind of relevant. I'm just checking out the vibes, right?
Yeah.
I'm not actually really declaring anything about filmmaking, blah blah blah, right? Because anyway. So they like, listen, you need to find here's some like tourist booklets, find accommodation in here, like call. So I take these books and I like go to the payphone and like make a few phone calls. And the aunt's like, listen, okay, cool, I got accommodation. Then I got on a bus, right? I don't know where the hell I am, right? It's like this is, it's like 10:30 p.m., right? Get on a bus. I'm like telling the bus driver, listen, this is the address here. Just like drop me here somewhere. I don't know where the hell I'm going, but it's like landmark. So then, again, grateful just for, like people coming in, on the path of your journey, right? And so he dropped me at this landmark. He's like, okay, you walk down the street and then make a left, and he was on point. He dropped me off and I walked down the street and then I like looked at the numbers. This is like, this crossing is going to be, whatever the names of the street, and then you're going to find the space. And there I am, bam, I arrive and auntie's like checking out, like, where the hell is this guy coming from? Like, kind of scouting me up and down. And then I was just like, well, cool. So this is interesting. There's a little side note here. So I get inside, inside the space. And I was actually the only person, I think, that evening. It was interesting, like seeing, I was basically like overwhelmed by all this, like, I guess, Catholic iconography. There's like white Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Over and like white Jesus was like in the room I was staying. I say, hold up, time out. I think I can only stay here for one night. This energy here is a little heavy. So listen, so then next morning, I exit the space. Right? I'm like, okay, auntie, thank you. It was real. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful. She made me breakfast, I think, that morning. Anyway, so I'm like, I asked someone randomly in the streets, right? So there I'm, and it's now daytime. Okay, cool. Now I'm seeing where I'm at, right? I'm like looking around. Okay, cool. There's a beach here and whatever. And then the guy's like, actually, I asked this one guy at this like little strip mall, right? Where can I find I'm looking for accommodation for the next 2 weeks, whatever. And he's like, I will go to this tourism office like down the street, right? So I go there and collect these booklets and figuring out. Now I have a little bit of time, right? I'm like, okay, cool. Let me just vibe here, right? Check out the vibe. And then I'm standing outside my backpack, about to like check out, okay, where's the bus route, private taxi or whatever. Then Rasimba, right, comes out of the supermarket, right? And we greet each other, right? He's seeing my thumb, like red, going green. And he just greets me, just, like the ites, right? Just the vibe. And then I'm like, hold up. This is a homie here, right? It's a cousin. Let me go say hi to cousin. So I go to him and I'm like, this is my story. This is where I'm from. He's like, I'm like, yo, can you drop me off at the spot, right? He's like, yeah, no problem. He's like, now hold up, man. You know what? Actually, you can just stay with my family. That idea is cancelled about accommodation. Like, hold up, you're gonna stay with my family. We got a spot for you. No problem. Nice. Calls his wife. Bam, 2 minutes later, there I am. In this family, in this household, like just with a lot of love. Yeah. A lot of just positive energy, right? Yeah. It's all about the energy. And so that was the journey. So then Rasimba basically became, just my guide in Barbados. Yeah. The local plug. And he would drive me around, right? To shoot and stuff in the mornings. Wow. And I said, Simba, actually, you need to be a character in this film. Yeah. You have to be in this film. So Simba, he's like, cool, take out the camera and we start rolling, right? Yeah. And that's basically like those stories was really, that's the beauty also of making films, of cinema, of art, right? There's this organic process that you also have to be open to, right? Yeah. Yes, you can have your script and you can have your fixed treatment, your shot list, blah, blah, blah. And like, the professor at the film school will tell you, this is, filmmaking 101. But really filmmaking is made. It's like you in the streets, you're going to make a body of work, right? Yeah. And you figure out yourself, who are you as well, right? Right. As you are gazing, like, who are you? What's your story? Exactly. Right? And that's critically important for me, even as a filmmaker. Like, I tend to point the camera to other people, right? And like asking them to tell their story, allow me in their household and in their lives, right? Especially with documentary, you spend like 2-3 years with people, like become friends with them, right? And so I think it's critically important, I believe, for filmmakers also to, to kind of flip the camera on you, right? Like, and engage with your own memory, your own family history, your own archive. And there's a power and a beauty to that. And I think it's like a one like initiation process for a filmmaker. I believe, Yeah, yeah. No, I think like because I in my own work making documentaries and stuff, I've been very interested in sort of the ethics of the gaze and what it means to even take someone's image, and how to do that respectfully and how to not exploit people. And I think part of that is also like having the camera turned on you and knowing what it feels like, and sort of negotiating those boundaries. We've got another question from Javed, which was, what made you make this film a documentary and not a narrative or a fictional rendition of the film? That's a great question. Actually, I haven't thought about it in that way, right? Because again, you make a film, you move on, right? But actually, to go back to the original question, the premise of the question, I think it's a great question on so many levels, right? Because technically, you can make a fiction film, right? Of the story. But I think for me, it was just like a documentary was just a little more easy accessible to make, right? In reality, right? As a fellow filmmaker, in terms of genres, right? Like, it's true. What acquires a documentary and a fiction film, right? Yeah. Right. It doesn't even, you can't kind of like, fiction is a whole other zone that you tap into. You're talking about like labor force. You're talking about like all these like amounts of equipment you need, casting and you need money, right? Yeah. I'm a guerrilla filmmaker, right? Again, I'm also, there's no like trust fund, there's no like parent you can go to. It's like, I'm a working class kid from South Africa, right? Like also, for me, that's also the reality, right? So for me, what documentary allows us, right, as storytellers, it gives us a little bit more easier access to go tell a story, right? Nowadays, you need a cell phone, right? You can take a cell phone, doesn't need to be an iPhone. It seems to have like some kind of camera with some kind of sound. Yeah. Go tell a story, right? Go tell your story. And that's the power also of like part of the broad discourse around decolonizing the cinema making process.
Absolutely.
Outside of this Hollywood capitalist idea of cinema.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that's what we are taught, right? At these like institutions.
Yeah.
That's a mythology for a lot of us, that idea.
Yeah.
It's like a kind of, idea to aspire to, right? For me, it's about the essence of like telling a story. It's not about like the fancy 4K camera, etc. Right? I mean, that's like the kind of trinkets, right? That's added on, but it's for me just the essence of telling a story. So documentary allowed me to tell the story like in the moment and go make the film using my own money, right? And it wasn't a lot of money. I mean, if you think about like, in fact, coming back to the previous person's question about like kind of the journey of like making the film, etc. I resigned, as I was saying, coming back from shooting the film. I use at the age of 24. So funny story. I use my pension fund. I resigned at age of 24, and I use a pension fund, right, to basically buy an edit suite, right? Not even an edit suite, a laptop, like a MacBook Pro. Bam. Yeah. Funny enough, actually, that was my first time me owning a computer, right? Like actually, like my computer, always just like work computers. And so I bought this computer, and I had some money. I hired a good friend of mine, Tapiso, who became the editor for the film. Yeah. I had a bit of money. I said, Tapiso, this is what I can afford you to cut this film. This is what I can give you, right? Basically, it was like, 9, but there was some other stuff I was doing on the side as well, to make extra money, extra income. Yeah. But that's basically how, and so again, coming back to your original question, which was this idea of like, the idea of, fiction versus documentary. It's just, documentary allowed me to tell the story the way I wanted to tell the story, in a very cinema verite filmmaking process, Fiction, I think if anyone has an idea of writing a feature film about the film, please, I would, go ahead, and I would like to support it, but I've moved on, obviously, with doing other stuff, and this is like, one chapter, I guess, but yeah.
I mean, also from listening to you as well, I think archiving the history of your family as well was an important motivation for you. And then obviously the documentary format allows for that, right?
Yes, exactly.
You're recording, you're making a document of these historical realities. And speaking about capitalism, actually, we do have a question pertaining to that, which is, how do you feel about, or what are the challenges? This is from Jamon Bergen.
Yeah.
How do you feel about, or what are the challenges in striving to decolonize our history and reclaim narrative while ultimately operating in a capitalist world?
Yeah. I mean, it's something we're grappling all the time. I'm sitting, I'm talking about all the time. This idea of like, how do we create almost like an autonomous, film, a space for stories to be told, like, right? Yeah. And also to democratize the medium as well, right? How do we make it more inclusive? Breaking away from, again, this Hollywood capitalist idea of how to make a film, what's a good film, the 3-act structure, the inciting, the major turning points, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, it's an ongoing challenge, right? And it's also, it's intersectional all the time, right? If you think about it, like, your own positionality of kind of your own politics of where you're coming from, right? What's your intention of why you want to make films, right? And also, I think, I think what's critical for me is like a social political lens as well, right? That, I mean, for myself, that's what I carry, in my work. But also, I mean, for me, what's critical also to understand is that, one is that there's this idea of a shared colonial experience, right? And so how do we move, within that context, right, of people who come out of a colonial experience, right? And now we are bombarded by this capitalistic approach to make film, to tell your own story, right? And we also see kind of who has the monopoly, it's still kind of around. I mean, even this VOD, this new era we're in, right, where Netflix now all of a sudden has a monopoly and has a say of, cherry picking you to go tell a story with a half-baked script. So you see that's happening, right? People are not really like, working on the craft,
Yeah.
It's like, you watch this. Well, and again, I don't want to like criticize other people. I think people must go tell their story however they want it, and they must sign the contract to whether it's Coca-Cola or, Wall Street, etc. But I think for me, what is critical is like, how do we reimagine, this idea of making films outside of that space, right?
Absolutely.
And this, I mean, a great inspiration here, and is third cinema, the history of third cinema, right?
Yeah.
You had like a rich tradition of cinema making in Latin America, in the Caribbean,
yeah,
in places like Asia, Southeast Asia, in Africa.
yeah. Yeah.
And for me, that's what inspires me, right? Because these people have been making films outside of the confinement of
absolutely
the Hollywood methodology of cinema, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I think actually studying, I think those sorry, just jump in.
No,
but I
please.
think studying those traditions, like obviously it's harder to find that information because it's not what's readily accessible. But when you start digging into the history of filmmaking, you find all these pockets of people who were using the film form in these really revolutionary ways. And like, in Latin America specifically, it was linked to all of these revolutions that happen, like in Chile and across, these sort of ideas of third cinema. So anybody who's interested in that, or like, independent cinema versus like these more capitalist models and what's actually possible, I'd really encourage looking into that, because on the one hand, it's also, being able to liberate the story, democratize the story out of these confines. Like you were saying, like, I'm not taking that money because you're going to restrict my liberty. That's what I had. That's the cost,
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, it's like, there's a lot of like what I really loved about, sort of the early stages of the avant-garde was because it was taking language and it was just breaking it up. And it was just like, we don't care. You're not going to understand
exactly.
it. Like, walk out if you want to, like, whatever.
Exactly.
Throw it over, like a toilet is a piece of art, and like then that became its own form of establishment. But in the beginning, it was this like just full of this like rawness, that was really so inspiring in the way that it challenged language, these visual languages, right? Because these visual languages are so linked to how we think, if it's in these linear ways, so all of these things, I think, kind of can come out of that question. And like, I think, money is one articulation of it, but how capitalism filters down and influences how we think and how we relate to one another and how we create is something I think we all need to be vigilant of within our own selves. In a lot of senses, the decolonization process starts with us, right? With yourself as an individual.
Real talk. I mean, it speaks to directly, I think, and in fact, I would like to also encourage, people to also engage with the work of like people like Sylvia Winters, right? From Jamaica. And this whole idea of the concept of a colonized people striving for, kind of redemption or a form of idea around liberation, to move away from this idea of, how do we, this dependency of like kind of, colonial imperialism, right? And I think, that's the unfortunate, like kind of this ongoing process, right, of undoing, right? I think recently Barbados obviously have, told the British, the British monarchy, like, peace out, we, we're gonna basically, we claiming our stake, to say we are an independent nation of people, of people are great thinkers, and we are capable of leading ourselves, right? Absolutely. So that's a microcosm, right, to this broader discourse that we are discussing here, right? Of undoing, of decolonizing, not just cinema, but also like how do we think about, kind of political life and social life outside of the confinements of, a colonial construct that was given to us, right? Emancipation happened, right? in the late, in the Caribbean, it was 1865, right? And so for me, it's like, moving from that space, right? And having, seen the great advancements, right, that we've made, right, over centuries now.
Yeah.
What is also, I guess, for us now, the plight, the question that's really pertinent to us is that, what are we offering, right, for that next generation? Are we just gonna, just kind of,
Exactly.
continue the cycle, on the treadmill, right?
Yeah.
Are we gonna get off the treadmill and say, hold up, let's like reconstruct and let's kind of, configure of, what are we, what's the kind of cinema we're making, what's the kind of art we're making? That's also intergenerational, it's intersectional. It's kind of just, move away from this kind of, global capitalist project, that's been keeping us at hostage, for the longest time.
Yeah, absolutely. Ches has a good comment. Amazing project coming from Barbados myself. It was a flip side about history, which seems to be forgotten or hidden and avoided. So that's exactly what we've been talking about. The suppression of these narratives. And Future Smith, who's also in Barbados, comments, the ancestors were definitely with you on this project for sure. How much has spirituality helped your filmmaking journey, and any advice on how to connect deeper with one's work and keep being motivated?
It's foundation is important, right? An anchor, an anchor for belonging, and also just like, finding your tribe, right? Finding home, the sense of like belonging, but also within that same space, like this idea of like a spiritual foundation, a spiritual, higher being, for on one level, I think, one is, even that idea obviously has been like, co-opted, right? Through commercialism and, etc. And also this kind of capitalist project as well. But I think for me, myself, and just like, coming to the question of, what is kind of how does the spiritual well-being grounds me is, I think one is that it, in my case, like Rastafari has been a great inspiration for me, right? And on just so many levels outside of the iconography of what it is, right? And the kind of like ideology and the philosophical, but just like the mere idea, of that, there's a principle creed within Rastafari, that the hungry be fed, the sick be nourished, the aged be protected, the infants cared for, and they could be clothed, the uneducated be educated, right? Just that idea, that creed, and carrying that philosophical idea that you have a duty to serve, right? To be of service to people. And that's what really grounds me, outside of many other, philosophical ideas that I'm sitting with, I'm thinking through. I think for me, that's just like a very basic principle that grounds me. It also gives me a voice, and like, this is your agenda, in this time on this planet, that what you need to go serve the people. And my offering is cinema, right? Telling our stories. But that's also, it's inclusive. That's to a large extent, my pedagogy is also based on this idea of like participatory cinema, right? We make films together. People are not characters in films; they are participants. They're participating in your film. We make these films together. We tell our stories together. Share skills, ideas, and that's what really coming to my spiritual groundation. I think that's what grounds me. And also it kind of allows me to a certain extent, have a resistance, a resilience, that you don't have to depend on Babylon, right? You don't have to depend on a system, to allow you can go do your own thing, because you can go into the archive, right, and just reflect on people's lives, and like, you can go read. Thinking about the life and the trauma of someone like Malcolm X, Amy Garvey, these great thinkers, right? And the persecution, Marcus Garvey, right? He was like was locked up in the States and was persecuted on so many levels, right? Deported back for like, apparent like fraudulent, tax evasion, etc. But this is like, I mean, you also have to think about like white supremacy as well, right? And for me, Rastafari is a direct response to that, right? It's about reclaiming one's identity, right? But also say we're part of a broader community, right? And so we have to serve that broader community, right? Not just in your little village here, but like people, there's various forms of inspiration. And like, again, coming back to third cinema is always a reference for me, right? Because this foundation has already been laid. It's there, right? We just have to go tap into the archive and see what people were doing.
Exactly.
And go do it. It's already the manual is already written.
Yeah.
You don't have to, go think that you are the first person to have created this project or this idea. No, people have been thinking about using cinema as a form of liberation, right? So I think that's, for me, just it's important to have an anchor, and that's, this is my anchor,
Yeah. There was another question as well, which I think links into this one as well. Yeah, it's about motivation, and it's from Javed as well, and he's a filmmaker, and he was saying, sometimes it is hard to stay motivated, and what keeps you motivated, what kept you motivated on this project and overall, and it sounds like that's a part of it, like what you responded to there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, like, I mean, in a sense, motivation is something that is gonna maybe even be specific to each person's psychology, right? And so I think there's also a part of it that's personal, and that you kind of just have to try things and figure it out. And I mean, for me, the energy that I've been getting from these conversations, from people actually responding, because you work so hard on something and you put it, and you don't even really know necessarily what you might be making, and you put it out in the world, and then what comes back is just, it's just not even, you couldn't even necessarily have imagined it, it's just downloaded from somewhere. It's just it's just this incredible thing. And I think this point you were making too, about when you were talking about like the process, or how you like to work, and I always like to think about that, what you choose to do is so much more than about the final product, right? It's about a way of life. It's about everything that happens in between, from A to Z, like all of those letters, like how many words can get made there, and the fact that, these kinds of processes, like making things, leave an impact on you, and what you choose to do really is, the relationships you foster, and all of these things are a huge part of that. We're gonna take any more questions if you guys want. We can chat for about 15 more minutes.
I just want to say, as a side note, footnote, big up to the jersey wearing, Arsenal. Go Gunners, yeah. I mean, just low key, I'm kind of low key Arsenal. I mean, I've been supporting Arsenal for the longest time.
For a while,
yeah. Nicholas, I mean, from the team, I mean, the Nicholas Anelka moment, right? 98, 97. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
they drew today, right? 3-3.
Security downstairs were like, we should make you walk up the 6 flights of steps because you're wearing that. So it seems, we've got no more questions coming in right now, but Kurt, it's just been so wonderful to connect with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's been such a pleasure. And I can't wait to see future work that you might be coming up with, and please stay in touch. Oh, and we'll make sure you get that contact as well.
Oh yeah, please. Yeah. And thank you, to you, inviting me, opening up the space, it's really beautiful. And I think we also now in the moment now where we rethinking this idea of community and this idea of collective healing, right?
Yeah.
Coming out of this, like a history where intergenerational trauma is a very real thing in our community. Yeah. And I think on one level, what cinema allows us is to kind of have a conversation, right? about this healing process, right?
Yeah.
That we embark, that we consciously decide to embark on, right?
Yeah.
And so this festival and the work you guys are doing, you know, is exactly that.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, give thanks and shout out to you guys and to your team, you know, and, you know, forward ever, right? Backward never.
Backward never.
Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, please do keep in touch.
Yeah. Yes, please. Let's do that. Yes,
Yeah,
I would love to. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, let's I will see your work and chat to you guys and just
for
you know,
sure,
learn
for
more.
sure. We
Yeah,
actually
for
made a
real.
couple films about mommies, about the project in the prison as well, so we could share those with you. And
yeah, and in fact, ironically, I've been working on a similar topic actually back home, and in actually my recent film, Not in My Neighborhood. So we should break bread. Yeah, we should do a follow up.
Yeah, for sure. That would be fantastic.
Cool, man. Huh? Okay, all the best. And love to everyone out there. Okay.
Of course. Take care.
Take care, man. Huh? Okay.
Bye.
Take care. Peace.